Start. Hi, everybody. I think we are live here. Let me, I'm just checking. Everybody? Yes, we are. Good. Excellent. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this live stream. I have been so rushed this morning getting everything done that I didn't even change the stream title. Scientology Indoctrination 101. There we go. Let's get that put up there and then make that look a little nicer. All right. There we go. At least now that I'm here, I can adjust things as they are happening. Okay, so let me just check in and make sure that everything is good. Yeah, it looks like everybody's got that on there. Okay. Excellent. Sorry, I'm a little coming down on the adrenaline because for the last 2 hours I've been like frantically moving and adjusting and getting things set up for the show here. I don't try to wait till the last minute. I swear I don't. I just, I gave myself hours, but it's just, I found that there was things I missed and stuff I needed to set up. And so here we are. And now let's go to the chat here now, or the screen where I've got this all set up. There's John now on the screen. Hi, John. Can you hear me? And are we good? Okay, and I cannot hear him now that we are live. Can I?
Yeah, I can hear you, but I can hear you twice with a delay. Once on the Zoom,
yeah, just turn the
and
volume.
once on the YouTube.
Yeah, mute the YouTube side.
Mute the YouTube side. Okay,
yeah,
let's
mute the
see
YouTube
if we can do
there.
that. Yep.
How's that?
Okay.
Okay, there we go. Good. Getting everything set up here. John's, in order to share the screen, or in order for John to see what we're doing, he has to follow us on YouTube here as well. And so we can't have the double sound. But now I can, are you all good?
I'm not sure yet. Because it's playing as a video, so it's playing from the start.
Yep. No, we're good. I can hear you on the screen, and we're all set up. Okay, normally we would have handled all of this stuff before we got started on the show, but we were so last minute, and I was horribly deficient in sending John the link to this until the last second, so that was 100% on me. So John, thanks for doing this stream with me today. This is all just kind of an off-the-cuff idea I had. I wanted to talk about today Scientology Indoctrination. And so I put together here, somebody sent me the illustrated booklet called the Scientology CS-1. John, do you remember this?
Yes, it's something that came along. I left Scientology, where are we? In 3 days' time, it'll be 40 years since I left.
Yes.
So this is slightly more recent than my own experience in Scientology.
Yeah.
So there's nothing in it that I haven't seen.
Well, exactly. Here's what we've got here today, folks. Here's the kind of the groundwork I wanted to lay for this, right? Is in order for cults, in order for a destructive cult to work its magic on a person, they have to change the person's worldview. They have to get the person to accept certain ideas and concepts and beliefs as true, so that they will then act in conformance or compliance with what the leadership of the group wants. And whether you're talking about a one-on-one activity, or you're talking about Scientology, or you're talking about the Moonies, or whatever, this would hold true, right? It would be true that you have to learn about the beliefs in the group and all of that. Well, it just so happens in Scientology that Scientology doesn't work if you don't learn these things and you don't agree with them and apply them. And you okay there, John?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just putting another microphone on.
Oh, got it. Okay. So,
stay with me.
Yeah. So, okay. So I thought that it might be a good idea to kind of walk through what I've not seen anybody walk through before, which is the basic indoctrination that anybody in Scientology receives before they get any auditing of any real importance. I mean, you can go into a Scientology organization and you can pay down, put down $100 and say, I want to get some Dianetic auditing, and they'll throw you into a room and they will give you some Dianetic auditing. But even then, even there, they don't really start doing it until they clear up a bunch of concepts with you. And this thing that we're looking at on the screen here, this says Scientology CS-1 illustrated. CS stands for case supervisor, which is the individual or the person who oversees the auditing that goes on in the Scientology organization. They're not the auditor, they're the case supervisor. They sit in a room and they get the folders of the people who get audited, and they go through the worksheets and they go through all the notes, and they determine what the person's program is going to be and what their next actions are going to be. The term CS is also used to describe what those instructions are. So and it's also used as a verb in Scientology. So you can be CS'd by a CS for a specific CS.
And the CS can be a member of the Commodore's staff, which is also CS.
Correct. That is right.
And he very frequently used initializations. I'm not going to make the mistake of calling them acronyms. I've been told off for that. And he'd use them again. So that Ron's technical compilations, for example, RTC, became the Religious Technology Center. And I don't know whether this is his affection for numerology, that things had to add up to the right thing, which we were never told about. But so with CS, you can be CS'd by a CS who is a CS.
That's right. That's right. All the above. So... Yep. And the C/S is usually used in Scientology for the case supervisor, or CS, right? Or the case supervisor's instructions. So this booklet is well over 100 pages, and I threw it into a PDF. I scanned it and put it into a PDF. And what I was madly correcting this morning is I missed a bunch of pages. So I thought I'd scan the entire thing beginning to end, but I'd actually missed a bunch, and so I was madly filling in the blanks there today. And let me pull this up here because we're going to sort of walk through this. Now, I don't think we're going to get through the entire book today. This thing is I think over 200 pages.
So we won't have achieved OT8 by the end of this session, I'm afraid.
Afraid not. But let me make sure that as I flip through the pages here, that those are updated. Yes, they are. Excellent. So I'm trying out all this new fancy stuff here today. So here's the contents of it. And we're not going to go through this. I just want you to see there's a lot here. And this is, let's go ahead and go to here's our introduction right here. I put it on 2 pages because it requires a 2-page spread for some of the definitions and illustrations and such that go through this book. And here it is right here. It's telling you, introduction, the Scientology CS-1, this booklet, is a precise series of steps to familiarize you with basic auditing terms and procedures. A full understanding of these terms and procedures is vital to ensure you achieve maximum gains and speed of progress up the bridge. So my contention, my thesis, right, here, the thing I'm putting forward is that this is actually so important and so necessary to the Scientology process that if you don't do this, or you don't have these understandings before you're going in for auditing, before you receive your very first auditing command or question, that the auditing probably won't even work. And by work, I mean draw you through the series of things that Scientology auditing is doing to you so that you will achieve what Jon and I constantly are talking about with these euphoric states, or these blissful awe moments that this induces. We talk
very good
right?
indicators.
Yes.
Very good indicators.
There we go.
Scientology. Yeah.
That's right. That's
and
what
look, there's a contradiction right at the start here, and let's put this down.
Yep.
That the way you trap somebody psychologically is you give them a double bind. You give them a conflict that they cannot resolve. And here is the conflict in this first paragraph. Let's now refer to the auditor's code, whereby this is something that every auditor has to do. And in the auditor's code, it says never evaluate for the pre-clear. And this booklet is evaluating for the pre-clear. It's telling you what to expect. And, you know, expectation, conditions, experience. So I've been saying that for many years now, that we tend to see and experience what we expect to see and experience to a large extent.
That's it. That's what I'm talking about. There has been a term in psychology called priming that has been used to sort of talk about or describe an aspect of this where you set expectations or you set up a person for what they're going to experience or what is about to happen or what they should think or believe about a thing. And
as with several other terms in psychology, it's a term borrowed from hypnotism. That was where it was, I think, first used. You prime somebody by, you know, it's like when you're watching a movie and there's a picture of a telephone in the movie, and then the camera goes away. You know the phone is going to ring, but everything has a setup shot. Everything is getting your attention to go in that direction, and this is a long series of setup shots.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. And this has been my contention, and Jon and I have talked about this for years, you know, for a very long time, is that this is one of the key ways that they get you, so to speak. And it just looks like education, but it's not. There's twists and turns here. And so I thought we've been talking about it, describing it, you know, trying to get it across to folks. And I thought, when somebody sent this to me, one of my wonderful viewers out there, I thought, here's an opportunity to actually walk through step by step. And we don't have to necessarily hit every step or every note of this, but we can hit some of the important beats and sort of see what it is that they're setting you up for when you go into Scientology. So the idea here is that this booklet is something that every single Scientology pre-clear, anybody who's going to get auditing in Scientology, they're going to have to do this. They're going to have to sit down in a room. And by the way, this is paid for. You got to pay for this. This is part of the auditing time.
Hey. Has everybody here paid? Because...
Yes, exactly.
Chris says you got to pay for it.
You got to pay for it. So this is part of your paid auditing. It took me, I remember when I was very first going to get some auditing as a student, free auditing from another student in the classroom, learning how to be an auditor back in Santa Barbara back in the day. It took 3 full sessions just to cover this material.
So for us to explain, it's going to take, what, about 30?
Oh, at least.
Hold on to your seat.
That's right. So here we go. Let's just get into it then. So basic Scientology basic definitions. Okay, and this is where I thought we might start having an interesting time, because right here, Scientology is taken from the Latin word "scio," which means knowing in the fullest sense of the word, and the Greek word logos, meaning study of. In itself, the word means literally knowing how to know. And I love this expanded definition, further defined as the study and handling of the spirit in relationship to itself, universes, and other life.
Well, let's take the basic principle of Scientology, that for something to persist, it must have a lie entered into it. There must be a deception if the thing is to persist in time. So there must be a lie in this, according to Ron Hubbard. Now, the first part is it's incredibly unusual if you're making portmanteau words where you push two ideas together. You would normally use all Greek or all Latin. So if we move aside, and he says that sceo comes from scienta, which is the root of science, which is a Latin word. And if we say, well, what does sceo, because there is no such word, in fact, in Latin, I'm told. What does sceo, and there may be somebody out there who knows better than I do. That often happens, unfortunately. What does sceo mean in Greek? Is there anybody there who's looked up sceo in Greek? Because I have. And it means a shadow or a shade, which is to say, it's a word for a dead person, a ghost. It's a word for something that doesn't really exist. So Scientology, to make it, as is, to make it go away, to get rid of the lie in it, Scientology is the study of shadows. That's what we've actually got here.
Isn't that interesting? Or the study of nothing.
Well, and nothing is such an important idea in Scientology because it's the first idea, isn't it? Life is basically a static. It has no mass, no meaning, no motion. That's you, that is. You are nothing. And you're represented with a zero in Scientology.
Exactly.
And that's what you'll become. When you've spent all of your money, your bank account will have zero in it and you will be nothing.
Exactly. I always thought there was some... I don't know even what the word is. It's just so
Hokum.
There it is. Yeah, I mean, it's such a, it's one of these things like with sceo, like if Hubbard was aware of that and used that and knew that, it's one of those he kind of things, It's sort of one of those, it's one of those things I think Hubbard really enjoyed getting one over on people in this really obvious, blatant way, right? Like, I'm going to make nothing out of all of you. I always thought there was something kind of funny in that, kind of like I'm going to, that it's hiding in plain sight, the reality of what he's really doing, making
and
nothing.
They're often very childish, his jokes. So, that when he got back from London in the early 50s and gave a lecture and said, all of you have spent lifetimes in arslicus, he'd heard the term arslicus.
Exactly.
And, and all of you are, him addressing his audience, that's what they were as far as he was concerned. And he was right. They were paying $500 each back in like 1954 or something to listen to this man insulting them.
That's right. I just think that there's a, it's just such a twist. It's just such a funny thing to see that kind of openly like that, to get in on the in joke, to realize, oh, there is an in joke here, that whole thing. Now, I also think that this definition of the study and handling of the spirit in relationship to itself, universes, and other life is one of these, like, what kind of definitions? It sounds so metaphysical and important and significant. And what's it really saying? Study of the spirit in relationship to itself, universes, and other life. I don't think that's what Scientology really is.
Yeah, Perry Chapdelaine, who was involved with Hubbard very early on, was a mathematician. I was in touch with him way back in the 80s, and he said one day Hubbard said, come on over and bring a bottle of scotch. We've got to make this into a science. And because Perry was an academic mathematician, they sat down and they wrote the Dianetic axioms. And the whole point was to make it, and you've got lambda. Did you ever come across lambda in your time in Scientology? You've not just got theta, or theta as the English are meant to say, but you've got lambda, which kind of went off somewhere, had a bit of mint sauce on it or something. And this incredible sciencey, make it sound sciencey,
Exactly.
And what does it mean? I spent a couple of hours with a woman many, many years ago saying, the axioms of Scientology are nonsense. And she said, no, they're not. They're absolutely, scientifically. And I said, well, okay, space is a viewpoint of dimension. And she said, I'll explain that to you. 2 hours later, she accepted that it's a tautology. It doesn't actually say anything. Space is a viewpoint of dimension. What's dimension? It's it's seeing something. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. It just kind of meets itself in the tail, in the head and the tail, right? Yeah, it's goofy stuff, and yet it sounds. And I think that God, there's hundreds of those Dianetic axioms too. That's the thing. Is the key there was, let's make it sound science-y. Not let's actually do some science. Let's just make it sound that way with some Greek letters and stuff, you know?
Well, science would involve experiments. And as far as I know, there are only 2 experiments that were conducted in Dianetics or Scientology. One by the University of Chicago, which said Dianetics is nonsense. And the other by the original Los Angeles Foundation, which Hubbard refers to in Science of Survival, that they knocked somebody out and then said things to them.
That's
right. It's not very nice. And they were unable to recover any of what had been said, which is not really surprising, because we know that memories are not laid down when you're unconscious. So the whole concept of the engram kind of explodes, I'm afraid.
Exactly.
That's why boxers don't remember the 10 seconds before they were knocked out, because the memory's not been incorporated. All to do with potassium and iodine, I'm told. Beyond my pay grade.
Yeah, it's a little above my pay grade, but I do know for a fact human memory does not work the way L. Ron Hubbard suggests or claims it does. That's for sure.
I know pretty much that nothing works the way L. Ron Hubbard claims it does. Such a con artist.
Such a con. All right. Well, let's take a look at what else we have here. So this is what now I want everybody to remember, though, as much as we're going to lambaste and take this apart and criticize this is what every single Scientologist, and I do mean every one of them, has to go through, has to learn, and has to agree with.
If they are ever to become self-determined.
Exactly. And become
do what they're told.
That's right. Become cause over their own existence. Right. And here we start, right? The Thetan. The Thetan is the being himself, who's aware of being aware. Not his name, body, mind, or anything else. It's you, from the Greek letter theta, right? And then we have this concept of the mind. And this is where theta is sort of like, okay, you can't prove it. I mean, I can't disprove it, but I can't disprove that there isn't a teacup, flying around Jupiter right now either. It doesn't mean there is one.
I think there is.
Right?
Yeah.
If you're going to put something forward like this, and this has always been my biggest problem with L. Ron Hubbard and his, and the way he goes about doing things, or the way he goes about asserting truth, the biggest break from reality is right here. This is the point where you have to buy into this as a faith-based concept. This is not a scientific fact, and Scientologists blur that reality to the point of delusion, where they actually believe, because L. Ron Hubbard wrote this, that it's a scientific fact that theta exists.
80,000 hours of research, as he claims, in Fundamentals of Thought, I think it is, which is actually 40 years of a 40-hour week, and he was 43 when he said this, so he was 3 when he started researching. There are little tricks underneath everything. So why did he choose this particular letter of the Greek alphabet? Because theta, or theta, as the British say, is a Greek letter. Why did he choose this one? It took me years before I saw the solution to this problem, and it was quite accidental. I was looking at a Roman mural which had a gladiatorial combat in it, and above the dead gladiators was the theta symbol.
Really?
It means a discarnate spirit. It doesn't mean the being. It means the dead spirit, the defeated spirit. And it was, okay.
Really?
There we go. Dead in the head. Or dead out of the head.
You're kidding.
Yeah, would that I were.
Wow. How do you think that's another one of his in jokes?
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was told this story. It came from Aaron Hubbard Jr.'s son, and he said that his father had told him, and Nibs, Aaron Hubbard Jr., from 1952 to 1959 was the second in command of Scientology. And he left because his dad wouldn't pay him enough money to keep his children, and he needed to have money. He wasn't upset or anything, and then his father set about destroying him and spent the rest of his life doing that, because he was an expert on parenting and maybe being a little bit deadpan and ironic there, who knows. But Nibs said that at these congresses they'd have where they'd hit people up for $500, that his father would take him aside and he'd say, I wonder if we can get them to do this. So I wonder if we can get them to shout at an ashtray, for example. And so there are a lot of these things going on, which are actually seeing how far you can push somebody before they realize that they've been taken in. And what he found out was that, the sunk cost fallacy, that once you've invested in something, you'll tend to keep going in the same direction. I call it inertia. Spike tells me I ought to call it momentum, but there you go. A body will tend to continue to move in the direction it is moving, or not move if it's not moving. And so we keep going because the Nigerian prince has taken the first $10 and is now asking for 100 more, 1,000 more, 10,000 more, 300. And so we keep on going. So once you've got somebody to do something that's fundamentally stupid, I'll throw this little story in. I talked to a woman. This is when I first left. This was in December 1983. I had a list of people to talk to who might be disaffected with Scientology. And in 6 weeks, I talked with, I think, 38. No, it was 38 people in one day, actually. I come to think about it. Oh, dear. Those were raucous times. But I went to visit this guy, and he wasn't there. His wife was there. And I talked with her, and she'd been involved in Scientology 15 years. 15 years. And as yet, she had not graduated the first training routine, because the training routines say that you must have a major, stable win. And she, being the only sensible person I've ever met who's been in Scientology, said, how do you know it's stable? How can you possibly know that it's stable? So you're already being asked to lie. You're already being asked to agree to something that's not quite right. This is the increment of dissonance. The idea that you get somebody, it was a psychologist, a forensic psychologist called Brian Tully, wonderful man. And he gave a talk and he said, most white collar criminals will say, but I got to the office this one day and the boss said, could you backdate that contract to yesterday? And once you've done that, the next step will be something more. Exactly the same as with the mafia. You do them a little favor, or they do you a little favor, and now they'll tell on you. They'll snitch on you if you don't do the next thing. So with Scientology, it's just constant, this thing of accepting something that's not quite right and going along with it. How do you know it's going to be major? How do you know it's going to be stable? And what on earth does a win mean? That thing of all of these claims about curing cancer and raising people from the dead and having, never be catching a cold, and all of these things have been promised right from the start. Nobody ever achieved these things. And so we sort of thought, well, other people are achieving them. There must be something wrong with me.
Oh, absolutely. And you just haven't had the right process yet. You haven't had the right cognition yet. You haven't, audited out the right engram yet. It's always something more to do.
The next level.
That's
the next
right.
course. And you'd see people just like Amazon, you order something and by the time it arrives, you're bored. You want the next thing. And Scientology's like that. It bothered me seriously when I did the academy levels, class 0 to 4. I went up, I did 0, 1 and 2. But when I started on them, seeing how eager people were to sign off the check sheet so they could get onto the next thing. And I'd come and say, look, this thing about the tone scale and these contradictions between what it says in Upnosis and the tone scale and Scientology 8008, it says completely different things. And you realize you've just got to accept it. If you want to keep going, whatever seems like a red flag, whatever seems like a contradiction, just push it aside. Sorry about that. And keep going, stacking up these misunderstandings as you go.
Exactly. And here and sometimes I think the the subtleties of this can be subtle too. Sometimes they're pretty, out there, and sometimes they are pretty. Like the word Thetan comes from the Greek letter theta, which represents thought or life. And I hadn't really thought about that differentiation before until I was going through this. Thought or life. These are not the same things. Thought is something life does, but life is doing way more than that. And how is that supposed to work? How's that supposed to be a thing,
Well, and it gets very confusing. I mean, in psychology, you have psyche from psyche, which means the spirit, study of the spirit, which is what we're meant to be talking about here, or the study of butterflies. Because literally a psyche is a butterfly, but it's said that the spirit, when it leaves the body, inhabits butterflies, if you believe a certain strand of Greek thinking. And I think we're kind of in that sort of place. We need a Greek expert to tell us whether the Greeks have ever thought that this letter in their alphabet represented the individual. Hubbard at first, of course, talked about the theta being. Thetan was a later thing. So he starts out with the idea that you've got matter, energy, space, and time, and then you've got thought. That's how it begins, which is not particularly new idea, but consciousness is distinct from matter, energy, space, and time. And he then extends it so that it means thought or life. And as you say, you're kind of stuck with that. What on earth does that actually mean, that thought and life are the same thing? When I'm growing a tomato, the fact that it's got life, does that mean it's thinking? And what is it thinking? Is it thinking L. Ron Hubbard's going to come along and stick a nail in me, and
right.
See if it upsets me?
That's right. But these little things can become real sticklers. They can really mess with you later, in implanting these ideas or in accepting or educating somebody, if you will, in these ideas. It becomes fuzzy. It's thought or it's life, or it's this or it's that. Like, it's not super clear. But the person kind of walks away from this thinking it is clear. And everybody in the group seems to think this is all so clear. This is all so understandable. So I must accept this, because if I don't understand it or question it or have a problem with it, well, it's me. And so I have to suppress that. That's a big part of Scientology, the Scientology experience, I think.
And I think it's general to cultic systems and aberrant belief systems that you have to accept that you're inferior, and that the boss, the guru, the Führer, the dictator, a word that Hubbard also used, is superior. And it's interesting that, I had a very bad feeling when I saw that Hubbard used the word indoctrination. This is not education. This is indoctrination. It's putting the doctrine into you.
That's right.
And again, it's in complete opposition to the idea that you'll be self-determined, which is to say, able to think for yourself. As long as you agree with Ron Hubbard, you will be able to think for yourself. You'll never be able to discover any technology. Only Hubbard is capable of doing that. Though, of course, in the first few years, he wrote great long lists of all the people he'd taken ideas from, including Anaxagoras. And I've never actually worked out what came from Anaxagoras. Don't even know who he was, actually.
Oh, wow.
Probably Greek by the sound of it.
Sounds
it's all
Greek
to me.
It's all Greek to me. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now moving right over from theta to mind, and these are crucial concepts in Scientology. So the fact that they are defined in such loosey-goosey terms is kind of significant, right? Because this is supposed to prep you for your auditing, and as John was mentioning, right, double binds. Watch for double binds. So here we have the mind, and the mind is, now we're going to have some actual indoctrination happening, because first off, there is this concept that the mind is the accumulated recordings of thoughts, conclusions, decisions, observations, and perceptions of a Thetan throughout his entire existence. Okay, so how is that different from theta as thought exactly? I'm not sure.
Why is it the mind doesn't do the thinking? And if we've existed for 1.25 quadrillion years, and we've taken a mental image picture, 24 a second, same as a movie camera, oddly enough, or the old movie cameras. If we've been doing that, How many pictures is that? Is there anybody there that can do the math on that? 24 a second for 1.25 quadrillion years.
Oh, I thought it was...
How big a bag would you need to hold that many mental image pictures? And how would you carry it around with you? And if that's all your mind is, that it's just a collection basically of slides.
Yep.
Which have, Aldous Huxley's word feelies in them. They're all of the perceptics, as Hubbard said. That's all you've got. How do you organize these things? There's nothing in Scientology to tell you how that functions. It just happens. It's magic.
Exactly. And it gets worse because, even if you go deep, even if you go beyond this, and when I don't want to go too far afield out of what we're covering today, but even if you go beyond this material to the deeper materials of Scientology, you still end up with the mind is sheets of energy. Mental image pictures are sheets of energy that you're mocking up or creating, through all these moments, and then you can recreate them at will or something. It's a very loosey-goosey concept because it's kind of like Hubbard says, well, no, you're not carrying them all around with you all the time. But you are. It's again, double binds. It's like you are, but you aren't,
You can erase them during auditing. So it used to be that you'd refile them from the reactive mind to the analytical mind. Mm-hmm. But then in auditing, you were being asked if the image is erasing. Well, then where does it go? And and how many pictures have you got in the reactive mind and how many in the analytical mind? And does it really matter? Because neither of these minds does anything other than being a kind of library or a museum of images that you've somehow by magic got to manipulate. There's no depth to this.
Exactly.
What I was saying about memory before comes from Eric Kandel, who won a Nobel Prize for his work on memory, which is, we know that Hubbard wanted a Nobel Prize and tried, there was this project to try and get him one after he died. And David Miscavige would not take the answer that you can't have a posthumous Nobel Prize. That's one of the rules. It's like, well, get the rules changed so he can have one,
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, okay.
Whole thing is a little silly. Let me move me over here for a moment so you can see this whole picture of the mind as it's laid out there with all these pictures. And this is the concept you get from Dianetics and Scientology, as we've gone over right from the get-go. But there's more, right? Because it then says that the mind is not the brain, which they define as that part of the body inside the head that uses the nerves to send out instructions to various parts of the body. Well, that's one thing the brain is doing, but that's pretty inadequate description. But the mind is not the brain. The mind is the system that a Thetan uses to communicate and control people and things in the world around him. The system that a Thetan uses to communicate and control people and things. So it's not just bunches of pictures, but somehow we're supposed to draw from this illustration of all these pictures that there's some other system in place here that this mind is utilized for to control and communicate to people and things. Doesn't tell you how, doesn't tell you any of the mechanics of it, just this is what it is, and you're carrying it around with you. I think that is got to be when I talk about loosey-goosey, like, what are you talking about? I have so many questions right now, Yeah,
and we come to what is called the hard problem of consciousness that has obsessed philosophers for millennia, and Hubbard doesn't even come close to saying this is what consciousness is. No. He's just got these little stick figures, this kind of kindergarten set of drawings to try and bullshit us into giving him a load of money, which we did.
Yeah. Exactly, which we did. Exactly. But I wanted people to see like how kind of lame this stuff is, like when you get up close and personal with it and you try to engage with it in a real way, you'd go crazy trying to figure this stuff out. It doesn't really make sense.
And the thought that the brain is just a switching system. Now, we don't really know as much about the brain as people say, but what we do know is that there are perhaps 80 or 90 billion neurons, the same amount of glial cells. This year, they've actually found a third kind of cell, which is kind of funky. And you have this situation that, unlike a computer, and the only comparison that Hubbard ever gave us was to a computer back in 1950, when a computer was, of course, a calculator, so you could hold down a number. But unlike a computer, you're not dealing in zeros and ones.
That's right.
The neuron synapse, you can have a host of chemical interactions. You can have electrical impulses. You can even have physical movement between neurons. And you have all of these pathways, the complexity of which is such that any human being has the same potential of processes in the brain as there are atoms in the universe.
Exactly.
And this is reduced to, this is a kind of switching system. It's like a telephone exchange. It's like, not really. It's a bit more, the 200 brain regions, what's going on. And it fascinates me, the phobia that Hubbard managed to induce in Scientologists about psychiatry, psychology, psychotherapy, and the brain. It's a switching system, so you don't need to know about it.
That's right.
It's kind of like Richard Dawkins saying, we don't, God's nonsense, so we can forget about theology. Now, I'm not a believer in God, but I'm fascinated by, if we're going to throw the baby out, let's keep the bathwater.
Yeah.
Thousands of years of the cleverest minds stewing and trying to work out what's going on. And sad to say, Ron Hubbard was not one of those cleverest minds.
No, he was not at all. And it really needs to be emphasized. What you just said is actually about as much lip service as Hubbard actually gave to the brain. It's really minimal. It is very minimalistic in Scientology. It is sort of just kind of thrown into a bucket and forget about it. You don't need to know about this. All your brain is. And I was taught this. I remember literally arguing with other children when I was 7 years old, right? We talk about growing up with Scientology concepts. This was actually one of the things I argued with other children at the time when I was a kid was, your brain is just a switchboard. It's no big thing. It's the spirit that's the big deal. I'm trying to proselytize this crap. I don't even understand it, right? And I
hope you're getting 10% from all these kids.
And they were making just horrible fun of me. I was not having fun with this at all. And I really thought there was this thing, right? That this thing, it's just a switchboard. It's just a little, and that was actually, the telephone switchboard was actually exactly the kind of concept you'd have of this, sort of brain gremlin or something in there, just switching the connections. And as you just broke down, right, it is the brain is the single most complicated organism or thing we as human beings know about. Like, period. Just numerically speaking, it is almost an infinitely complex mechanism, and yet every single one of us carry one around. It's amazing.
80 to 90,000 million neurons capable of up to 200 connections each.
Here it is.
And activities at one time. Just this incredible, wonderful, brilliant. The result of evolution that's gone, and all Hubbard's got in 1.25 quadrillion years. I was talking with Mike Rinder about this, and he'd spend days with Ron Hubbard, just the two of them alone. And Hubbard would just keep on talking about racing atomic powered cars, And that seems to have been what he did for 1.25 quadrillion years. I'd get bored of that after a week.
Exactly. Exactly.
And dull bodies and this meat bodies, this disdain for evolution and the beauty of the world and what has eventuated from the 13.8 billion years that our universe appears to have existed for.
Yeah. It's wildly out of touch. It's wildly out of touch stuff. But this mind stuff, this Thetan mind stuff, I wanted to cover this. I mean, obviously they're covering it early, and I wanted to show you what they're covering with people so that you also understand. Here we are just pointing out some very obvious, we're just kind of having fun with this and poking at the most obvious things about it that are wrong. But Scientologists really think, and I used to think,
That's 7 years old.
That this was a complete subject, that all you needed to know was this, and you were going to be totally set. And you wonder, why it is that Scientologists would adopt such an arrogant, conceited attitude. It's because they have to, because if you challenge a Scientologist on this stuff, they have no answers. They can't talk to you intelligently about the brain and the switchboards and the neurons and all that stuff, because, well, it's just not important in Scientology, so therefore it's not important, period. And in the place of that knowledge, you have to substitute arrogance and conceit and ego, because that's all you got, I think
it's rather like, saying, well, the body's just a physiological unit.
Right.
And you don't need to know anything about it. You don't need, hands, feet, eyes. They're just, you don't. And dismissing the most complicated part of us in that way, not appreciating its complexity, is childish. Of course, he used to, in the original formulation in Dianetics, there was a file clerk.
Right.
Or file clerk.
File clerk,
if you're American. Yeah. Who, from the word cleric, who, these little things that are somewhere inside you that are running around, putting in all the plugs in the old telephone switchboard. It's kind of silly. And it's like somebody getting a transistor radio or, a computer, a central processing unit, and going, well, yeah, this is just the fuzzy bit that's in the middle.
That's right.
You don't actually need this. You just have to have the intention that your computer will work and images will appear on the screen.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Really.
No, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And just to really blow the whole computer thing away, in case that hasn't been done already. Computers are binary, right? It's zeros and ones. It's transistors and circuits, and it's in a yes state or a no state, an on or an off, right? And that's it. That's all you got. Imagine if every single one of those on-off stations actually had 100 different possible combinations, not just on or off, but 100 different values could be represented by every single one of those. And then you have something on the order of 30 or 40 different ways that those on-off switches, those switches can be connected to each other. Neurotransmitters come in all different shapes and sizes. They're not just one. So the number of combinations of things we're talking about here, if you just want to look at it purely from a math point of view, just with that, is already blowing away every math, sort of idea you might have about this.
It's pretty much the difference between 2 on and off, and 10 to the power 42.
Yeah, there we go.
It's got to be 42 because that's Douglas Adams' favorite number. But when you see how many zeros that is, those are the possibilities at any given moment. I got very into this when I was writing Opening Our Minds. What kind of model can you give? And it's like, well, say that you had a sphere and within it you had 80 billion little individual nodes that could be any color. And they could be dark or light. They could be any of the 80,000 shades that the human eye shades and tones that the human eye can recognize. Mm-hmm. And there are 80,000 million of them. And that is, you've got the neurotransmitters, you have serotonin and dopamine and all of these lovely things going on, neuropeptides. You've got the hormonal system, which is also related to this. And if you actually move serotonin from one part of the brain to another, in one part of the brain it does one thing, and in another part it does another.
Exactly.
And then you've got the simple potassium iodine chemistry that's going on in there. Just so beautiful, so remarkably complicated. This very thought that when I speak a sentence, I don't have to construct it first. It just emerges out of this place. So we're able to think our way in real time. And compared to this, it's like comparing a Ferrari to a cardboard box.
That's right.
that
That's
Hubbard's model of humanity is pretty much a cardboard box. It's this not quite three-dimensional idea that he's got going, and he's got to sell you on it. And he's not the only con man or woman in the world. There are thousands of systems out there. You know, you get into the theosophical system and your astral bodies and your etheric body and all of this stuff. And once you started doing this, I was talking to Joe Zimhart this week, and he was saying, well, in the Church Universal and Triumphant, you have 4 bodies above your own body. You have the Christ body and this body, and you visualize them so hard that you experience them. And it made me think about this woman who was in the awful New Kadampa tradition, a new tradition. That's really a problem for me. And what you're meant to do there is visualize the now dead, thankfully, guru, so that he is always with you. And I heard of a case of somebody who ended up in a psychiatric hospital because they couldn't get rid of this thing. And it made me go, well, in Scientology, you're kind of visualizing all of these ideas and seeing the world, interpreting the world. Your reality is being interpreted for you in this way.
That's right.
And it diminishes you. It makes you small. And at the other end, of course, it makes you feel superior. So you've got all these tiny people going around who've never had a thought in their lives because Ron Hubbard won't let you, who believe that they're really special. And when it comes down to it, that kind of narcissistic self-respect is about all you'll get out of Scientology. You'll think you're fabulous and turn into Danny Masterson if you're really unlucky. You know?
Yeah, I mean, it's not hard to see why it is that, one, exactly what you just said, how people can become so simplistic as Scientologists, but it's the delusions of grandeur that make it awful. You know, it would be funny if it wasn't, if the personality changes involved in this and the ego changes involved in this were not so ugly, and they are almost uniformly they are.
Well, and, you know, we've talked about this, and I won't get into any detail here, but you know, since May I've been researching the life and times of Charles Manson, and I started out sort of thinking, well, you know, the fact that he did 14 months of Scientology in prison is going to be relevant. After I'd spent a little time with it, I went, the murders wouldn't have happened without him studying Scientology, because it's Scientology that led him down that route. And a lot of that is the narcissistic self-obsession, the idea that you are, in his case, Jesus, of course. He came to believe that he was. Yep. And that, you know, there is nothing good that's going to come out of that. And, you know, not much that's good has really come out of Scientology. It's ruined quite a lot of talents. I'm sure that Chick Corea would have achieved so much more if he'd not been involved in Scientology. He's such a brilliant man. And I think that's often the case, that you're actually believing that you are a god, but you're actually in submission all the time to Ron Hubbard and his really childish ideas of the world.
Exactly. Well, exactly right. And moving on with those ideas, we've covered Thetan, we've covered mind. Now we go a little bit further, and we get, of course, body, the complete physical structure of a human being. The body is not the person himself. And we already had that the brain is not the mind. And now we get that the body is not the person himself, right? There's this external thing called a Thetan, and that's what you really are. And this is where you're really starting to be set up for failure. I can't emphasize this enough from a psychological perspective, how fucked up this is, because it creates this.
Is that a technical term? Fucked up?
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm gonna use it very technically here, because it really does set you up for failure. It sets you up for. It's a key principle, which is why I'm going to harp on it for a second. Because you have to believe you are not you. You have to. And I'm sorry to tell people this, but your body, that's you. That is who you are.
And person, personify, even if you are a spirit, you are personified in the world through your body and mind. For me, one of the real difficulties after Scientology, after 9 years of believing this, even though I wasn't humiliated and abused like everybody else in Scientology, pretty much, was this contempt for the body.
Yeah.
The idea that it's just, you can drop this thing, you can leave this thing, you can, and coming to the point where I'm saying, I am the composite, the person, the self, the him in the himself is all of this together. Mm-hmm. It's not, you know, and I think Hubbard, you know, because he was always sick, because, you know, he was overweight, he smoked 100 cigarettes a day. He always had something wrong, something going on. He had terror stomach, as he defined it, because he believed he had ulcers. They didn't find any with the x-rays, but he was anxious. Of course he was anxious, because any minute he could be found out. Any minute somebody could see through him, and people often did. And so he lived in this phobic state, which is a kind of bipolar state, where he'd be really high because he'd think he'd cured his ills, and then he'd be really low. Scientology is all about this mind, body, spirit relationship, because in February 1938, Ron Hubbard had his wisdom teeth extracted under nitrous oxide, and he would say that he was dead for 8 minutes during that time, and he left his body. He went exterior from the body.
Yep.
And his whole life after that was the failed attempt to get out of his body. Well, I'm relatively happy with my body, aged though it may be. And I quite like being personified. I like being, you know, having a nose so I can smell the flowers. And having now spoken with more than 1,000 Scientologists over the years, I've yet to find anybody who had a convincing exteriorization experience. I met one person who believed she could do it. She had done it before Scientology, but never did it again. Then you have Ingo Swann, who, of course, got involved with the CIA and cost them tens of millions of dollars, who again said that he'd not achieved his psychic abilities through Scientology. He already had them. So he was already nuts before he came along.
Right.
So apart from that, and I've talked with, you know, the highest ranking Scientologists, you know, people who did the class 12 course, like Otto Roos, who did it with Hubbard, and none of them, in fact, you know, Otto gave me one experience where he thought he might have been exterior. And there's the story he had of Mary Sue Hubbard, who was again screaming at Hubbard on the ship about him being a charlatan and a fraud, and him saying, "What do I have to do to convince you?" And she said, "I've never been exterior." So Otto was told to find every exteriorization process. I think he told me he found 90, and run them on Mary Sue until she went exterior. And eventually, after a few weeks, Mary Sue Hubbard just said, "No more, I can't do any more." And that's the reality, this pretense that, which comes from Theosophy and many other places outside of Scientology. It's not original, that you can leave your body and do astral traveling, as it used to be called. Not seen any evidence of that. Not since Hubbard first announced it in 1952.
Nope. The total sum evidence of Scientology's. Here's the trickery of this, and it's not contained in this book, so I'll just say it, is what's true for you is true, right? It's all subjective. The entire emphasis of Scientology's epistemology is that knowledge is wholly subjective. You decide the truth or falsity of a thing, and if it's true, period. So if you say you're out of your body, you see yourself in a disassociated state that we would consider to be actually maybe trauma-induced and maybe something that shouldn't be happening with you in a mentally good place, Hubbard wants to induce that. He wants to make you mentally unstable, make you disassociated, and then validate that state as proof that you're a Thetan.
And you will be out of your head.
Yes.
I think that's a common expression. You will be out of your mind.
Yep.
Or as psychiatrists call it, you will be depersonalized. And so what people usually experience as exteriorization is the sense that they're no longer in their head.
Yep.
They're no longer perceiving from within, you know, from the eyes, the nose, the ears, the perceptive. There's generally around the back of the neck is quite a common one I found. But they don't have any perception. They just have the feeling that they're dislocated. And this is frequently recorded as a psychiatric symptom. depersonalization. The other aspect of it is derealization, where you can't see the world as it is, but hallucinating, which also can happen in Scientology. I've met people that happened to.
Yeah.
Particularly when they're doing training routine 0.
Yeah, exactly. There's a couple things that are real powerhouses in Scientology for inducing these states, and certain kinds of auditing are perfect for it, and the training routines, especially the training routine 0, and that's actually in this book later on. I don't know that we're going to get to it today, but
it looks like we're going to get to about page 12.
Yeah, exactly. So we're gonna carry on here. So anyway, the point of this, of course, being on this body Thetan thing, right, that I wanted to really stress, they're putting in right away, the body is not the person himself. It's very, very important to how Scientology does its magic that you believe this. It's not going to work on you. I'll go so far as to say it won't work if you don't.
You won't have the correct hallucinations.
Correct.
If you're not prepped, if you're not primed for them.
That's exactly right. That's saying it out loud. And here we are, exterior, right? They're going to go even more into this. In Scientology, it's been discovered the Thetan is separable from the body. When this occurs, we say the person is exterior, gone exterior, means the person, the Thetan, is moved out away from the body and is aware of himself as independent of a body, but still able to control and handle the body. Literally, exterior means on the outside. So they take, a little bit of truth and then a little bit of nonsense, a whole lot of nonsense, and here it is, right? You are now, or you have a goal or a purpose to be exterior. That's a thing in Scientology. It's an acknowledged reality, and we want to induce this state in you, is kind of the message of this page here, right? So we, outside of Scientology, have already said, right, we're talking about disassociation here. We're talking about trauma responses. We're talking about places you don't want to go, but it's exactly where Scientology wants to send you. And they're giving you this factual representation of the world that is not factual at all, right? That you have to adopt this new idea.
And at the other end, there's trauma at one end, but there's mania at the other. And I have for sure seen mania induced in people during Scientology. Very early on, I met a guy who was covered in bandages and really happy, which is mania, hypomania. And he was saying that he'd walked through a plate glass door because he was exterior at the time. And kind of going, so being 3 feet back of your head might not be a very good idea then.
Exactly. And that's not the only time that we've heard stories. I've read case studies or CS, not case studies, but CS instructions from Hubbard, to remedy people who have hurt themselves, and the reason why is because they were outside of their body. Right?
Absence of mind, as it's called.
Ugh. So then we get, so we have this exteriorization thing, right? Really important concept early on. You're getting it on like page 10 or whatever. Then we go to auditing, also called processing.
And we're not here going to define the word audit, which he initially did, which means to listen.
The principle of helping an individual look at his own existence and improve his ability to confront what he is, and where he has been. Oh, boy.
What does that mean?
Yeah. Well, here we go. Here's the listens part. Scientology practitioner, auditor means one who listens.
Great. That's good. I'm glad we got that.
Yeah, we got that much.
Wouldn't like anybody to have a misunderstood word.
That's right. And then, of course, the auditing session, the period of time devoted to auditing. And this is just the beginning of dipping their foot in the pool of the framework of control that is set up in Scientology, called an auditing session. So first we start it with a period of time. It starts, it ends. And this is a formal thing in Scientology. It's important that you understand in Scientology, an auditing session is not, okay, sit down in that chair. Okay, now we're going to, and here's the first command. There's a formal thing to it, that whole this is the session and end of session. These are commands given to the pre-clear during the process. It's formalized. And then, of course, we have our pre-clear. There he is, Mr. Happy Guy. Pre-clears are always shown happy when they defining what a pre-clear is. Finding out more about himself and life, and is thus on the road to becoming clear. A higher state of spiritual existence and awareness is going to be achieved through processing.
And we're into a whole set of circular definitions.
Yes, we are. So
that you've not been told what a clear is, but you're talking about a pre-clear, and you know we've come to this point where, like it or not, the person reading this, if they're coming to it, you know, from nowhere, they're being given a series of misunderstood words. It's like when I first arrived in the communication course, the first thing you did in the first course you did was operating Thetan training routine 0. So you had to clear what an operating Thetan was before you could do this drill. Never evaluate for the pre-clear.
Exactly.
But that's all this is. It's an explanation of who you are and what you are, rather than actually sitting you down as they used to do in 1950 and telling you to do something, you know, which will show you that this does or doesn't work. Unfortunately, it shows you that it doesn't work generally, so that they can't get more money out of you. So you've got this elaborate idea, and Hubbard put forward the idea that if you have misunderstood words, you will commit overts. Mm-hmm. And if you don't know what an overt is, tough luck. You will commit crimes, transgressions, sins, whatever term we want to use. Why that should be called an overt, I've never really quite understood. But, you know, Hubbard's mind was a rather complicated place, I think. So he's saying, on the one hand, if you have misunderstood words, you will do harm to others, and then he's giving them to you.
That's right. That's exactly
rather
right.
Like saying that OT3 will kill you within 2 days of seeing the material, and here's a screenplay I wrote about it.
Yeah, exactly. Because
I don't like human beings, you know. I mean, let's get rid of them.
There's a commenter here, D. Velasquez, who's saying, I'm watching because my wife's employer is eating this Scientology stuff up, making the wife learn about ARC and tone scales at work. She's been so upset thinking that she's going crazy. And then he says a little bit more here, but it seems like this stuff is made to be just confusing and is just a money scam. Yeah, you're getting it. That's exactly right. That's exactly what this is.
But it's meant to be, it's a bit more than that. Yep. That is right. Mm-hmm. But what it's meant to do is enslave you.
Exactly. That's right.
So we want your money, but psychological enslavement was certainly Hubbard's goal. And he achieved it. He absolutely achieved it.
That's right.
The people who, as you did, Chris, spent years of their lives serving him and pushing money into the coffers of those above as part of a, you know, and he, you know, the end of Scientology is to get people to believe that Ron Hubbard is the source, this really important term, which was hinted at in the power processes, which used to be grade 5, you do before grade 6, and then you do clear. And then it kind of moved aside. And then it came back on the highest level of Scientology, operating Thetan level 8, which is the one where you come to be at cause over mental and physical matter, energy, space, and time. Not really. But it's a position where, you know, you've lost control. That's the reality of it, because what you're admitting to is that you believe that Ron Hubbard created the universe and everything in it. He is the source. He is the God. And that's all there is. There isn't actually anything in between. It's just getting you to this point where you will worship Ron Hubbard. So this guy's wife is actually being given a religious indoctrination. If she's in the United States, I believe that's against the law.
It is. No, absolutely. There's a case that could be made. You can write me an email, by the way, and we can talk about this. I'm actually working with somebody else who's actually in the same boat right now. She's also an employee of a company where Scientology is being shoved down her throat. It's a clear-cut violation of EEOC regulations. You cannot be forced to have religious teachings in a secular work environment. Almost I think every state of the union, you have grounds for a lawsuit in doing that and contacting the EEOC board. and reporting it is your first, I believe, the first order of business if talking to the boss about it doesn't result in them stopping, because they're not allowed to do that. And even if they're offering the WISE program, the World Institute of Scientology Enterprises, the Scientology secularized business administration stuff, it's still pure Scientology, and you still have a case. And lawsuits have been brought and already won on this exact matter in Oregon and I think a couple other states. So you have the law on your side on this one. So there we go on that. Just since it came up, figured we should mention that. Okay, so we've got the pre-clear, the mind, body, all that crap. So then we go to so now we start getting into the mechanics of the auditing. And this is actually right here. This is the first point of, well, maybe not the first point. I think we've already spelled a couple other points. But this is a very important point of departure from sound, good mental health and counseling. Commands. A command is a certain exact instruction or question that a pre-clear can follow and perform. Commands are given by the auditor as part of auditing. For example, recall a time you communicated with someone would be an example of a command. There are other commands, and some commands are physical commands. Walk over to that wall, touch that wall, turn around. And any command that's given in a Scientology auditing session, which is what we're talking about here, is not, it is mandatory that command be performed. It's not an option. You don't have free will. You don't have a choice in the matter. That's an important part to understand about this that is not stated in these materials.
And it's important to understand that Hubbard's practice from the age of 16 until Dianetics when he's 38 years old, he, by his own admission, I wrote a paper about this called Never Believe a Hypnotist, which is a quotation from Hubbard. And he practiced hypnosis for 22 years and boasts about it and recommends books about it. Yep. It's worth mentioning that the term command is what would have been usual for a hypnotist to do. You tell the person that they are going to be 7 years old and in the schoolyard telling people that their brains are just telephone exchanges. You insist, you assert, and this is very much a part of Scientology, that you are taking control of the person. As Chris says, in the training routines and then in the so-called objective processes, which are further down here, you will not only command the person to do it, but if they are reluctant or resist, you'll grab hold of them and make them do it. Now, with the Me Too generation, we have certain new rules about other people's space, and Scientology flouts those rules completely. Yep. And he's happy to, and that control, we've had exteriorization. That's the most important concept in Scientology that you'll be able to. The second most important concept is control. Yep. That you will be able to control other people simply through your intention. What a lovely idea. So if you want people to fall in love with you or give you a huge amount of money, you'll just be able to demand that telepathically. Now, don't try this at home. It doesn't work. You'll be wasting your time. But it's all about control. It's all about, which is, of course, what magic is about. Magic is about making other people do what you want without them knowing that you're in charge of them. And that's whether it's black magic or white magic or green magic. It's the idea of, enforcing your ideas rather than having to persuade anybody or use reasoning or logic.
That's right.
Which we would rather prefer, I think.
Exactly. I love that I can just move us around on the screen while we're live. That is just ultimate power to me right now. But speaking of ultimate power, no, this is actually what you were just talking about. This is really, really important stuff because Hubbard talks about and blatantly says many times in his lectures that when you give a pre-clear command, he is following it. The reactive mind, the part of the mind that you're addressing in Scientology auditing, which Hubbard just made up, by the way. But that part, he says, and he insists on this, is when you give it a command, it follows it. Now, if the person is confused, is sitting there stuttering, is sitting there saying, well, I'm not sure, I don't know, blah, 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 you're to ignore that. You're to understand that that has happened. Your command has been followed, and you must insist that the pre-clear tell you what it is that now what picture or what image or whatever is coming to mind, because it's there to be found. In other words, Hubbard's evaluating again for the pre-clear by saying to the auditors that he's training, oh no, they absolutely did it. It is 100% under your control as an auditor, and you can do whatever you want to with the pre-clear's mind during the session, and it will obey you. And he's very clear about that.
Yeah, I wrote a little book called Scientology: The Cult of Greed, and one of the sections is about hard selling. And it's quite surprising. Hubbard basically says that you'll find that most people are in a hypnotic daze.
Yes.
And so you can just order them to do things.
Yes, he flat out says that.
That's the contempt that he has. I mean, another aspect that moves directly over from hypnotism is his use of the word reverie in Dianetics, the mental science of modern health, where he says this isn't hypnosis. This is this other state called reverie. Now, reverie was the standard term used by hypnotists for a light trance, a trance where you are still aware of the environment you're in, as opposed to a deep trance where you are lost and complete, you become a chicken or what have you. Whatever the hypnotist demands, you become. In a light trance, which is what is used generally in hypnotherapy, you're in a kind of daydream, a reverie, which is, of course, where the word originally comes from in French. And Hubbard just picks up these terms, reverie, command, and puts them in. And his model of the mind is very much that you have a hypnotic mind, the reactive mind, and an evaluative mind, which he mistakenly calls analytical.
Yeah.
But he had a misunderstood word. What can I say? He had quite a lot of them in the end.
Yeah, he did.
And so you are fundamentally, I mean, when Steve Hassan first saw Training Routine Zero, he said it's the most overt use of hypnotism he'd seen in any cult.
Yep.
And Steve's looked at hundreds of cults. So there we are. We just bang on. We're using processes and procedures, and Hubbard uses the term process. We are processing people. That and the word indoctrination, the word command, these were all red flags for me when I first saw them. But it didn't stop me because I wanted what was being promised, which for me was not superpowers. That all seemed a bit fanciful to me, I must say, at the age of 19. And I'd come from Zen Buddhism, where Gedo Zen or magic is considered to be childish anyway. But I wanted emotional equanimity. I didn't want to feel as much as I did when people were absolutely horrible to me. And, my girlfriend ran off, that's the primary thing. I wanted control of my emotions so nobody would ever upset me again. And guess what? I didn't get it. In fact, I didn't get anything, really. I got 9 years of runaround where you start being in this closed circuit of definitions.
That's right.
So that you're experiencing things within the words that I used, but in the real world, outside of getting very good indicators, because all hypnotic procedures, repetition, fixation, mimicry, the basis of inducing trance states, altered states, reverie states, is that's Scientology. Every procedure is something that leads you to an altered state of mind by repeating something, by mimicking something, or by fixing your attention on something. And you don't have to. I recently, there's a chapter coming out in a book on psychiatry and Eastern spirituality, Springer Publishing, and co-wrote a chapter with Steve Hassan. And in doing this, I looked at the physiological procedures, the things you do, like sitting and staring at something, which we call meditation, or confronting in Scientology, or dancing, drumming, davening, where you're rocking backwards and forwards, which is used both in Jewish and Muslim studies. That all of these, fasting, praying for a great deal of time, staying up for too long so that you don't sleep properly, these all lead to states which people are told are transcendent. But the reality is, if you take away the religion, if you take away the theology, and you stare at something for half an hour, you will start hallucinating.
Right.
And you'll start to feel euphoric. Thusly in mindfulness, people are using these techniques without really understanding what they're playing with and the potential dangers for a small but relevant amount of people in doing these techniques without somebody there who understands that what they're inducing is the Ganzfeld effect and that it's predictable, and it doesn't mean that Krishna is coming to earth or Jesus will save you. It's right. Just physiology, I'm afraid.
And that's exactly the whole point here, right? Is exactly what you just said, is if you can prep the person's mind, or you prep the person for what it is you're about to do to them, and you prep it in such a way that you've got all the bases covered. You got, okay, they're going to feel like this. Here's what that is. Oh, you're going to feel like this. Here's what that is. I've got a label for it. I've got a name for it. I've got an explanation for you, because it can't just be that you walk out feeling giddy and it's like, oh, well, that feels good. No, you want some answers. You want some certainty on what just happened to you. Well, here it is on a silver platter. And that's what all of this is. And that's why I feel that it's powerful stuff and worth talking about, because this is the pre-auditing education that makes auditing work at all. Just to kind of really harp on that point. If you control a person's interpretation of reality, which is what this is, you control them. You own them. You got them. Right? And that's what this is all about. You're not disassociated. You're exterior. You're not having a trauma moment. You're having a spiritual moment. Like, you reframe all this and you turn it 180 in the process, which makes bad things good and good things bad. That's how kind of twisted this stuff is, and what we're demonstrating here with this today.
And I mean, I've with various fringe therapies, I've often heard this thing about you'll have something and you'll feel worse, and you'll be told by the therapist, oh, that's a really good sign. That means it's working.
That's right.
Which in Scientology is the way out is the way through.
What turns it on will turn it off.
The way out is that's the exit, and you need to get out and don't give them any more money.
That's right. That's right. No, these little mantras, these little thought-stopping cliches are littered throughout Scientology for exactly this reason, right? And the 3 golden rules of auditing that Hubbard laid down in 1950 and laid down again in policy years later was what turns it on will turn it off, the way out is the way through, and get the PC through it. As though there's something to get through. Even the language, right? A guy has a trauma response, a guy's freaking out, get the PC through it. Don't bounce, don't let the guy walk out of the room, don't let him go chill out. Oh, no, now we're in the midst of it. Pound through that. Like it's some journey you're going on,
If we look at a somewhat more subtle an intelligent appraisal of stress, Ronnie Janoff-Bullman's wonderful book, Shattered Assumptions, where she points out that pushing somebody through their trauma, making them experience their trauma, usually makes it worse, doesn't actually make it better. And it was found in the 1990s with debriefing at accidents where first responders were taught to get the person to say what had happened to them immediately. And they found that this actually meant their recovery period was longer. Wow. So Ronnie Janoff-Bullman points out that it may be that we go into denial about things because we aren't ready to deal with them.
Right.
And that if you force somebody to re-experience, supposedly abreact, relive a traumatic experience, it can make it a whole lot worse.
That's right.
So, we're dealing with this. It's like, Tom Cruise insisting that he's better at an accident scene than a doctor. I would much rather have a doctor who knew how to put a tourniquet on than having, Tom Cruise trying to put my broken arm up against it and do a contact assist with what had just hit it, But in his case, I mean, it becomes delusive that people start to think they have superpowers.
That's right.
But any objective test of that, I've said this so many times before, Chris, but when I was giving a talk, I put a little bit of silver foil, a bit of tin foil on the table and say, any of the operating Thetans who, of course, exterior and watching me, because, of course, I'm always watched by Scientologists. Of course, they've got to know what I'm doing, haven't they? And they've got an Office of Special Affairs that's meant to be stopping me from doing it. So they must, of course, as there are so many of them that are exterior and have these abilities, if this piece of tinfoil, if you can move it just 1 inch during the course of my lecture, I'll believe. It never happened.
Nope.
Yet they'll claim they're moving clouds and changing traffic lights and this kind of thing.
That's right. That's right.
But no objective proofs. And that's a wonderful aspect of Scientology. You mustn't prove it because it'll freak people out.
That's exactly right. Oh my God, that's exactly right. That's another little hidden gem throughout the materials, all in the lectures, throughout the books. There's these little bits sprinkled in, right? And that's one of them is, don't freak everybody out by going exterior and demonstrating your superpowers because they're not ready for it yet. And we could end up
I'm ready.
Yeah, and we could end
do
up.
it.
He says early on.
Switch my microphone off right now.
He goes so far as to say that we could end up recreating the implant societies, if you really want to go all whole track and space opera here for a second. Hubbard talks about how previous civilizations had mechanisms and electronics that would allow them to capture and trap Thetans. And the only place I can go to offer an explanation of what that would look like is Ghostbusters. With the proton packs, you can catch the ghost and you can contain them. That's exactly what Hubbard was talking about in History of Man and back in these early works. And he cautioned Scientologists, don't freak everybody out. They're not ready for it yet. Keep your superpowers to yourself so that we don't, have that happen again. I know that sounds absolutely batshit, but I'm just saying that's in Scientology. There's all these little
they kept
bits,
it to themselves so seriously that Hubbard created an organization to infiltrate governments the world over because they were not able to read what was in the files telepathically.
Exactly.
They didn't have these abilities. So I think, that passage where Jesus has risen from the dead and Thomas, who's his disciple, who's known him all of this time, looks at him and says, I don't believe it's you. And rather than saying, you have to believe, you have to have faith in the auditing process, or what have you, he says, put your fingers in the holes. Now, I think with Scientology, we have the same thing. It claims to be a science. So it must be rigorous. It must be testable. And, Hubbard, when we find him talking about his research, there's that wonderful LSD years after they have come off of LSD or whatever it's called, 1977, somewhere around there.
Yep.
And he says, in research in 2 cases, my heart dropped when I saw that. How can you do a research into anything with 2 cases? And then you find out
that was twice as many as Hubbard usually used.
Yeah, well, it's usually just him.
It was him.
Interviewing David Mayo about how OT5, new era Dianetics for operating Thetans, was developed. David, I did a 3-hour interview with him about it back in 1986. And he said, actually what happened was he got better because I used misidentification, misownership processes on him. He said, I wasn't really bothered about body Thetans. And you're going, the whole level's about that. It's you misowning somebody else's concept. That was why Hubbard had got bronchial pneumonia that winter. He'd had it every winter for years, but that year it was because of that. But he said as soon as Hubbard started to recover, he'd say, David, stop, write this down. And the bulletins were just written by him in session, narrated to David Mayo. Mayo wrote 6 of the bulletins. All the rest were Hubbard. And when the new version of it, after David Mayo was thrown out, came out, I happened to see both of the packs. I saw the old one and the new one. And the idea was that the old one, the reason that people like me had defected after doing OT5 was because David Mayo had interfered with the pack. And there were these subtle little things in it. The only difference in those 6 issues was the signature.
Yeah, exactly.
Originally, they were signed David Mayo, and then, so they wouldn't be damaging, they were signed L. Ron Hubbard.
So
and
ridiculous.
that's all you got.
That's all you got. Well, listen, let's get a little bit more progress in this, and then we'll wrap it up for today. But I did want to go a little bit further here. We covered command here, and I thought that was an important thing to get into, and I'm glad we talked about all that stuff because it really is crucial to understanding how and why auditing, quote unquote, works. And then we get here, the process, right? This is, again, indoctrination in basic Scientology. Every single Scientologist goes through this. And we have this business of processes. And the last bit, the auditor repeats the questions or commands of a process until the process is complete. And you talk about, and we can go into more detail about this, but talk about trance induction, right? Repetition, mimicry you mentioned earlier as well, which is a type of process, mimicry, hand-spaced mimicry. Hubbard uses these concepts extensively in formulating the thousands of different processes that make up Scientology, but they are categorized into different types, and repetitive processes are a huge body of auditing commands where there's just the same command or question over and over and over and over for hours.
Where could you
end.
communicate to a terrapin?
Right, exactly. Where can you communicate to a throat, or from to whatever, right? Let's say, and here's an example of an actual Scientology process. You're going to go in session. You got a sore throat. They're going to audit you on this sore throat. So the command you're going to be given over and over and over and over and over again is, from where could you communicate to a throat? From where could you communicate to a throat? As though that means something. Well, I guess I could communicate to a throat from the end of a pencil by shoving it down into somebody's throat, right? Like you're just going to come up with answers that apparently are going to then be evaluated as being significant answers from your past and your past trauma. And by answering this question over and over again, you're somehow going to erase or blow or get rid of the trauma connected with your throat and communications to it. And I can't believe that everything I just said actually made perfect sense to me at one point in my life, but it did.
That's the biggest difficulty, isn't it? It's like when you're thinking about how ridiculous somebody's beliefs are, when you meet them, you kind of go, but I used to believe this.
Yeah, exactly. That's why you don't see me making fun of other people's beliefs a lot. I mean, sometimes I'll titter over this or that, but I don't really care what other people believe. It's what they do with it that matters to me. But yeah, this command thing, this process thing, this is really, really vital. See, and this is another point of major, major departure from psychology or therapy or licensed ethical practices, is if you're at a therapy session, and I don't care what procedure you're using, what treatment modality, who you're talking to as a licensed therapist, if you say enough, if you say I'm done, if you say I want a break, if you say I need to go to the bathroom, if you say anything that indicates you want to stop doing what's going on, you're free to do that. Not in Scientology, right? Once the process begins, once the auditor has started the session and you are in this process mode where you're going to do the process, the auditor is the one who tells you when you're done. You got no say in it of any kind.
And this passed into Earhart seminar training. It's EST, Landmark Forum. He was Jack Rosenberg, in real life, his real name, second-hand car salesman and Scientologist, who decided that you could lock people in a room, take their watches away, and not allow them to go to the toilet. Take complete control over them. And the process they used became a little more moderate as time goes on. But that idea of controlling a person so that they will learn that they can control themselves.
Right.
And what you're actually doing, I mean, I did this great thing with John Hunter about the dopaminergic defense hypothesis, which sounds complicated, but it isn't, that you stress somebody for 3 days by, basically attacking them and making them reveal their secrets, their humiliations, their embarrassments. And we create more and more dopamine the more stressed we are. And then you release it. You tell them, right, you've arrived. Here's a certificate. You're great, and you get a dump of dopamine. You'll get this real high, this real euphoria, which for most people after an auditing session lasts for about 3 days. I asked a lot of people questions about this. Some people, you can be out there for years and in a bliss state where you're no use to anybody, frankly.
Exactly. But the more average experience is 1 to 3 days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the roller coaster, you'll descend just as you do after faith healing, and you'll feel dreadful because you'll have exhausted the dopamine and quite possibly the serotonin in your system. So you have to go back and you're told that you've done something wrong. You're not told this is what happens to everyone. And it's what very evidently happened to Hubbard, that he was on a lifelong roller coaster, interviewing people who worked with him.
Yep.
He had these terrible fits of depression. But in public, as with all gurus, he was absolutely happy and brilliant and wonderful.
That's right.
It's a performance. That's all it ever was.
Exactly. I happen to think that Tom Cruise is a similar personality, but that's just my opinion. But I think he's like that. I think when he's in public or in front of people, it's all a stage performance.
And it would be true of any great actor that they're able, I can't remember who it was, but it was somebody who was on a talk show years ago, and they said they were on this actor, and this actor was just wonderful. And afterwards in the green room, they said, wow, what an incredible person you are. And the actor went, I'm an actor. Exactly.
Something to keep in mind with actors. Okay, so that's our process. Okay, and then... Okay, and I've talked about this before at great length on my channel here, so we'll just cover this very quickly. Let me make sure people can see it. Yes, let me move John down to the bottom here, and we'll move me somewhere over here so that we all can see objective, subjective. Scientology is not just messing with your mind, it's messing with your body. And so there's objective as well as subjective processes. I guess the main point, now that I sort of think about it, as to why would you have objective processes at all in Scientology, and these were developed pretty early on. 1953, 54 is when he first starts developing these things. And
indeed, when his son L. Ron Hubbard Jr. developed them, we're not entirely sure as to who developed which, and they just Tipexed out Junior later on.
Right, that's right. But they are all about establishing, as you mentioned earlier, that theme, that motto in Scientology. It's about establishing control. It's very control centric. We're going to control your body during this mandated period of time called an auditing session, where you're going to gain full control. The theory goes you're going to gain full control and self-determination by submitting to the ultimate control that we're going to exert over you.
You'll achieve infinite control.
Yeah.
8C, infinite control. You'll be able to exert tone 40 and make things, doing things. That was one of the things that bothered me in Scientology. I was told that tone 40 was this thing that these C organization people were using, but it sounded more like shouting to me.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of
a much lower tone sort of way of approaching things, in which Hubbard, of course, did on a daily basis. That was something that really put me off when I realized that he was a furiously angry human being.
Yeah.
And when you're looking at somebody who's meant to be your hero and your guru and what you aspire to, and you realize that they have a dreadful flaw that you yourself don't have. I don't have a bad temper at all. Fairly easygoing sort of chap. And finding out that he loved screaming at people. He loved traumatizing people.
Excuse me there. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, Hubbard was just a cat and an oaf when it came to this stuff. But this is kind of important because when it comes to auditing, you're going to have these two different kinds. You're going to have objective, you're going to have subjective. And different processes, different kinds of auditing, right? Some of them are memory-centric. Some of them are pick up the bottle, walk over there, put it down. What's its color? What's its temperature? It's all very physical, universe-oriented stuff. And I guess Hubbard must have had, I mean, the reason he said objective processes were developed, the reason he gives, is because people were not up to controlling their subjective reality or their memory, or their ability to do subjective processes was poor for some reason. And so we need to undercut that by controlling their body first and getting that under control, and then they'll be able to control their pictures. L.
Ron Hubbard Jr. had a slightly different take on this, which was that at one of these congresses, some of the students started heckling. And so his father said, come up with some processes whereby we can control them. And this was where training routine 5, which later became an auditing procedure, training routine 6, 7, 8, and 9 come from. The upper indoctrination training routines. And the idea is that you get the students to do this to each other so that they won't be heckling you. And as is so often the case, and I think this does need to be said, Scientology is a stimulus response process. You know, Hubbard criticizes the reactive mind and says it's just stimulus response, there's no thinking. But almost every step in Scientology, you can say what happened in Hubbard's world that made him do this. You know, so why did he attack psychiatrists? Well, because his second and bigamous wife had a psychiatric report drawn up about him. Before, I think 2 of the 5 first foundations were actually run by psychologists. They were fine. He had people who believed in what he was doing. But then the word psych became a terrible bad word, and we had to be phobic about it. But with so much in his, of course, you know, he's primed. Something stimulates him and he responds. And many years ago, 1984, Jerry Armstrong, when I first met him, said Hubbard was just trying to heal himself. If you look at the list of the claims he makes in Dianetics, Modern Science and Mental Health, it will cure short-sightedness. Nothing about long-sightedness. It's kind of interesting. He was short-sighted to the end of his days. You know, at the Philadelphia, you know, when he gave the Philadelphia doctorate course at the end of 52 and 53, Helen O'Brien, who was the head of the Hubbard Association of Scientologists, ran the Philadelphia organization, put that course together, collected the money from all 38 of the students that took that course. She said, we put a big fishbowl on the counter so that people could throw their spectacles away into it. Not one pair of spectacles was ever thrown away. But it also, in Dianetics, he says he's going to cure asthma, which he had all of his life. He's going to cure bursitis, which I'd never heard of. It's a lubrication between muscles and bone. And then he had it in his right shoulder. He had a bursa that didn't work properly. It never did work properly. So he's trying to cure himself, and he's trying to get exterior. Why is he trying to leave his body? Why does he loathe himself so much that he can't be inside himself?
Right.
You know, and it's because he was a horrible person. That's
right.
The answer to that.
Because he was probably in a lot of pain and a lot of suffering, a lot.
And he smelled.
Yeah,
he smelled
exactly.
bad.
And his teeth were, I mean, all of it, all of the above. Right?
Yeah,
just
and he had a lump on his head. Not
a good guy. But all true. All absolutely true, right? And very much a motivator for Hubbard's nonsense. Now,
and this idea of an objective and a subjective process, you can't differentiate these things. That you know, subjective things are outside you as well sometimes. And when you're doing an objective process, it's because you're subjectively doing it. So he's actually again shifted the notion of objectivity and subjectivity and redefined them without even telling you.
Good point. Very good point.
Propaganda by redefinition of words is the name of the policy letter where Hubbard explains why he's doing this to you.
That's right. That's exactly right. He explains in detail how Orwellian it is And then he says, and we're going to utilize it.
But
Basically.
2 600-page dictionaries.
Yeah.
There's been nobody in history, even Shakespeare didn't invent that many words.
I know, it's
He did
wild.
give us the word factory, by the way. I think we should acknowledge Shakespeare took the word manufactory and turned it into factory. So
Oh, no kidding. I've always been constantly amazed when I look back at the list of words Shakespeare introduced to the language or phrases. It's way more than you think. However many you think he did, it's way more than that. It's shocking how responsible that man is for so much of our modern lingo.
So, of course, there is a difficulty in that we go to the first recorded usage of a word in the Oxford Dictionary, and the first recorded usage is often in Shakespeare. But it could have been a fat bloke down at the pub.
Oh, yeah.
Who was actually saying, "Oh, Bill, I've got this great new word."
Oh, yeah, absolutely. No, he was propagating it or popularizing it more than I think he was necessarily inventing everything. But
who knows?
But boy, there are some turns of phrase out of Shakespeare that I will just never, infinitely clever. So clever.
I mean, he gave us the word glister, for example, as in all that glisters is not gold.
Yeah. That's right.
Which was very quickly turned to glitters, but there we go.
Oh, lots of stuff. Well, listen.
But unfortunately, Hubbard is not in the least bit poetic in his choice of words.
No.
You know,
so I wish Hubbard. His poetry was horrifying.
Execrable, I think, is the correct word.
There's a good word. There's a good word for it. I think we're going to move toward wrapping up. It's been almost 2 hours. We have covered, as we predicted, barely the first 20 or 30 pages. And that's fine, because the points we made are the important ones, right? I just wanted to give, and maybe we'll do a part 2 at some point.
Well, let's just do the next thing and wrap up with that.
Okay.
Because the next thing is the mental image picture.
Yeah.
And I think that this is something that's demonstrably nonsense. That the idea that your mind consists of 24 frames a second, a mental image picture is an exact copy of something.
Yeah.
An exact copy of something.
Let's take a look at it here.
That a person saw or experienced in the physical universe that's now stored in his mind. It's like a photograph that includes everything the person experienced when the picture was made. The energy, the mass, touch, taste, smells, sounds, colors, and temperature. It even includes the thoughts, conclusions, emotions, and the awareness or unconsciousness the person felt at the time. Now, a person can contact a mental image picture and re-experience everything that was copied when the picture was made. Such pictures can be made to appear when someone thinks of something. For example, when a person thinks of a certain dog, he gets a picture of the dog. Now, when we actually get into memory formation, which is still the greatest puzzle of the human mind, that what can be shown is that, say that you lived in a house for 20 years, and during that time it was redecorated 3 times. When people remember something that happened in a particular room in the house, you will find that what they've done is reconstructed the image in their mind.
Correct.
Because what very often happens is they'll remember a later decor in that room. It's a simple way of checking this particular idea. So when we remember something, we do something a lot more complicated than pulling a slide out of a box and having a look at it. We're actually, and that also explains and video machines have gone now, but memory is not videotape. This thing that psychologists were saying back in the ancient times before DVDs. Memory is not videotape. We don't carry with us precise recordings of things. The Challenger experiment was one of the things that challenged this. That when the Challenger blew up, there was a professor who had his students write down where they were and what they experienced and what happened, and waited some years, brought the students back together and asked them to write again what they'd experienced. So this is them looking at their memories. He then sat them down with their original depictions, only 2 of them had actually said what they said in the first place. And one guy, I think, really hit the nail on the head. He looked at his own handwritten account. He said, "That's my handwriting, but that's not what happened."
Right.
And this way of perverting memory, of getting people, because they're connected to this stupid little lie detector machine, the e-meter, to then say, well, it read, so that must be true.
Yep.
And, you know, to wrap up on that, the idea is that you'll have mental image pictures of your past lives being an expression that Hubbard borrowed from Aleister Crowley. We should call it the transmogrification of souls, I personally think, or reincarnation if you prefer. But we have this idea that, you know, and who's in Scientology that hasn't had a past life memory? You know, I mean, you've had these things. And when you go to it, you go, well, therefore there are, you know, however many, 11 million people who've been through Scientology, however many they're claiming at the moment. But there are certainly tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who've used these past life regression techniques, as they're elsewhere called. You would have thought by now that there was somebody who had been at the Battle of, well, I said Agincourt the last time I did this, so I will say Crécy, which was about 100 years before, where the nasty English invaded France. And there must be somebody who remembers having been in some battle at some point in the past, and you could say, just speak one line of the language at that time. If you have these mental image pictures which have everything in them, they will retain those sounds, and you'll have somebody who can speak medieval French or Chinese. Or Janice Gilliam Grady, bless her heart, in a wonderful book, Commodore's Messenger, talks about Hubbard saying he actually crewed a ship with people who'd never sailed and said, well, you'll all have done this at some time in a past life, so go and do it. And they very nearly killed themselves.
Yep.
And you kind of go, they then got into awful trouble in various ports because nobody could speak Spanish. And you're going, hang on. Ron Hubbard could speak Spanish. He must have had in his 1.25 quadrillion years. So it defeats itself. It's a nonsense when you look at it.
That's right. And that's exactly right. And again, it's already built into the lectures, to the technology, to the methodology of Scientology, that you never invalidate somebody's past life memories, no matter whether they've been proven true or not, because maybe the person is telling you it was a memory from 700 years ago, when in fact they're a little confused about the dates and times, and it was 7 million years ago, see? So don't ever tell somebody that their past life memories are bullshit, or even try to fact check or debunk them, because the mere fact of doing so, or effort to do so, could turn off the person's ability to remember these things, because you're invalidating them, right?
Or make them up. I mean, at the other end of that, I talked with Karen de la Carrière last year sometime, and she was saying that when she was the most senior case supervisor in Scientology, and she was a class 12, she was one of only 8 class 12 case supervisors in the known universe. And she said that while she was in Florida at the Flag Land Base, she saw the folders of at least 200 people who had been Jesus.
Yeah.
Never invalidate people's past life memories.
Oh, we used to joke about it at AO, because there were at least 8 or 9 people who had recalled being Arthur Hubbard or Quentin Hubbard, yeah. Quentin, right? And and apparently the joke was, this was the bookstore officer at AOLA back in the day. There was a woman there who had been on the ship with Quentin, who had been his girlfriend for some short period of time. And so the joke was, oh, let's take him over to meet, Joan, right? And see if they remember her, right? Like this whole, like it just became a bit of a joke how people could, even in the Scientology world, we would joke about that stuff.
And you look at the way that the Tibetans will check reincarnation, and I'm afraid I don't believe them either. But if they believe they've got a tulku, somebody who's reincarnated, as and I think they're missing about 2,000 since the Chinese invasion, then when the Dalai Lama, the current Dalai Lama, was chosen, he was shown, a guy who had worked with the Dalai Lama, who was his servant, put before him a blanket with objects on it some of which had belonged to the Dalai Lama, the 13th Dalai Lama, and some of which hadn't. And he instinctively, at the age of 3 or 4, I think it was, picked up the objects that had belonged to the Dalai Lama. That one, you get into a bit of trouble when you read the biographies of the 14 incarnations of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, which is who the Dalai Lama is meant to be. They are such different people. I mean, my favorite was the one who used to stand at the top of the Batala Palace in Lhasa, which is a massive, massive thing, so that he could piss on the people down below.
Oh.
You know. So they've had different temperaments from one body to the next. And maybe that means that the brain and the body actually are a lot more important than Hubbard thought and are having an influence on the Thetan as they occupy those different bodies.
Now. You know it's just their aberrations and restimulated evil purposes, John. It has nothing to do with their brain or their body. Come on.
Not their body Thetans and their service facsimiles?
No. God, come on. KSW, man. Get with it.
I know.
All right. Well, I'm glad we did cover this mental image picture thing. This is actually the point of pure fantasy in Scientology that unfortunately really, really messes with people's heads even after they're out. They get this model, you could say, of how the mind works. And this is really shoved down your throat. The mental image pictures, the processing, commands, auditing. This is not light grade Scientology. This is like the core stuff you have to accept. And you have to buy into this stuff, and you have to believe it. And then once you've modeled your whole internal reality to this, then you start thinking about how you have pictures and how you have to, and Polaroid pictures and making up pictures and picture this and picture that and energy sheets of pictures. And it just, they go crazy with this stuff. In Snapping, Conway and Siegelman, in, reviewing different groups, said Scientology may have the most debilitating set of rituals of any group in America. And they said that, if you left the Krishnas and the Moonies, after a few months, you'd be okay again. But with Scientology, they estimated that unaided, it would take 12 and a half years, which I thought was a very interesting number. Yep. And I was in touch with them through Tony Ortega, who is an impish person, because I'd said something in an article that wasn't true, which is in fact about the first edition of Snapping that had only talked to 3 Scientologists. And so he printed my article and then with a comment by Conway and Siegelman. I mean, how dare he show me up in this way? Because for the later edition, they talked with more than 30 Scientologists, I think, to put their information together. So courtesy of Tony, I got in touch with them and I said, you said 12 and a half years. Would it be not true to say that it is more likely that if somebody leaves Scientology and they decide to ignore what happened to them, they don't seek to understand what happened to them, then for the rest of their lives, they will actually be a Scientologist. They may not use the language, they may not do any auditing, but their belief about how the world is structured. And that's what really brought me back. I retired in 1996. I came back in 2013 because I realized there were an awful lot of really good people out there who were still trapped in these blinkers and were not, so they'd leave Scientology and they'd have had the overt motivator sequence. I said Hubbard wasn't very poetic. And they go, oh, that's karma. What goes around comes around. And you sit down and say, what do you know about karma? Have you heard of Vipaka? And they say, what? Is that a kind of jacket, a parka? No, that's the word you should be using because that means reaction. Karma is action. Karma, vipaka. And as Joe Zimhart pointed out to me this week, the original idea of karma was just, you've got to do the rituals right or the gods won't do what you're asking. So everything has to be exactly right. And that gradually becomes this idea of everything you do is relevant. So if 417 people get on an aeroplane and it crashes and they all die, it's because somehow it's been worked out by something that all 417 of these people at this moment deserve to die. And I'm kind of, if we're talking about conscience, I don't need any sense of karma because as Ron Hubbard said, if you're a psychopath and you don't
Yeah, he was actually, he criticised Bantus, wasn't it? It was Bantus, among black South Africans, that to them it was an overt not to steal something.
That's right. That's exactly what he said.
But what I found was that people were still thinking along the tram lines that Hubbard had laid down. And when I was first over in the States in the 80s, people at the now defunct Cult Awareness Network would be saying, we can deal with anything. We can deal with any Jewish, Christian, Hindu, Islamic, therapy, commercial cult. Then we come to Scientology. And it's just completely baffling the saturation, the immersion that people have in this subject. So it becomes almost impossible to reach them. And of course, until you break that cultic shell, and the way to do that is to challenge any of Hubbard's stupid assertions. So affinity, reality, communication, if you raise communication, you will always raise affinity. But Hubbard said bullets too are communication. So what he's saying is if you shoot somebody in the hand, they'll like you more. And you go, but this is a philosophical principle upon which the world operates. Afraid not.
Right.
You know, but you've got to be able to challenge it. You've got to be able to say, I disagree with Ron Hubbard. And then it will be natural that the next time you know, I remember talking with Cyril Vosper, who 14 years before left Scientology, written The Mindbenders. You know, he's in the book, Have You Lived Before This Life? His name was taken out for some reason. But 14 years after he left, he said, I still cross the street and I sometimes think, was that an overt? And you're going, oh, it's still in people's heads.
Yeah.
And it's not a good system. It's not true. It doesn't work. The claims made for it are nonsense. You won't get any supernatural powers, because if they had supernatural powers, Chris and I wouldn't exist.
That's right.
We would have been eliminated by psychic means by now. I've been speaking about this for 40 years now. Where's the lightning bolt? You know,
exactly.
What's going to happen to me? It doesn't work, but it will. Again, to come back to L. Ron Hubbard Jr., he said Scientology works, not as L. Ron Hubbard says it works, but as L. Ron Hubbard intends it to work.
Yeah, exactly.
And that is true. So, you know, it's not that difficult to get out of it once you realize that the way out is the way out.
Exactly. There's the door. Walk through it. And it's things like this, by the way, that we're talking about today with this Scientology CS-1. This is one of the reasons why. It might sound and seem like kind of a, you know, this sort of, oh, wow, they have this whole booklet and, you know, you have to spend all this time going through it. This is one of the reasons why Scientology has such staying power in people's minds, is because they put books together with pictures and illustrations and concepts that you are forced to agree with in a formal process. It's not just you kind of pick them up through the acculturation of being part of the group and taking part in the meditations or the practices or the seminars. It's laid into you in Scientology. And that's not a small point, because this Scientology CS-1 we're going over, this is just one example of one of many things that are done to you this exact way in the Scientology processes. So, so this is how it works. You know, you want to lay this stuff in so that people never forget it. Put them on an e-meter, put them in a room, make it a formal process, make it something they have to pay for. And they assign so much importance to it, you know, and it lasts. It's something they're going to get tested on. It's something they need to know, you know. It's like you add this weight to it, and it becomes important, and it becomes significant, and therefore they'll hold on to it for years after the fact. Because after enough time, you forget all of that importance. You just remember the concepts, and they just seem so true and so real and so valid. that you couldn't think of the world any other way. That's the goal. So, that's the product.
I mean, one simple way to do it is pick up, you know, any of the Scientology books you like. History of Man's always a good laugh. But pick the book up, read a statement from it, and go, is that true? Mm-hmm. And if it is true, move on to the next one. But sooner or later, you'll find him making claims like, for example, that he was a wounded war hero, an explorer who'd studied with gurus in Tibet, India, China, and Mongolia, and was a nuclear physicist. And you'll find that none of those statements is in fact true. The Alaskan radio experimental expedition, where he sat in Ketchikan, Alaska for months waiting for spare parts to come for his boat, the Magician, his ketch, which wasn't. That becomes an expedition. The
radio
West Indies
testing thing or something. Yeah.
Yeah, he was testing a radio. And in fact, he spent most of his time, and this is why we know what he was doing, on the radio show in Ketchikan telling funny stories.
Exactly. It just lies through his teeth, right? But what's the thing that Hubbard says that actually has a little bit of truth connected to it? If you lie, how do you get something to persist? You lie about it.
Yeah, you put a lie into it.
Right?
Yeah, I think the world does persist without that. But I think we have to say, why does Scientology persist? What's the lie? And the lie is very simple in Scientology. It's the idea that it works.
That's right.
Or that it gives benefit.
Exactly.
And it doesn't. It makes people hateful. It makes people feel superior. It breaks up relationships. It ruins families. It drains bank accounts. It leaves people helpless and floundering. And the worst part of it, as I looked at it, is finding out what happened to people who got close to Hubbard. How many people ended up committing suicide because Hubbard had promised them. I talked about Helen O'Brien in Philadelphia. Her partner, John Neugebauer, had bulldozed bodies into ditches after battles in the Pacific War. And he had post-traumatic stress disorder and how. And Hubbard said, that's fine. That's no problem at all. We can... And because that gave him hope, when push came to shove, he took his own life. The same is true for Jan Halpen. And on and on and on. There are so many people that Hubbard led to believe. And it's a terrible thing about so many of the cults out there, that they're making promises that they absolutely cannot keep. And they make you feel guilty because they didn't keep their promise.
That's right.
Because it didn't work.
Exactly. All right, folks, we're going to wrap up today. It's been a good chunky. We've been here at it for over 2 hours. This is a good live stream, and we've covered some very, very basic, very, very important information about Scientology, how it works, how insidious it is, and why it persists in people's minds. And I think those are valuable questions to answer. And I think today we've done a pretty decent job of doing that. So maybe we'll pick this back up and walk through some more of this stuff, or maybe we've made our point. We'll figure that out. But
let's see what comes in the comments.
That's right. But we'll see what comes of that. But
people say, please don't say anything more about this.
I know, right? I've had enough. Anyway, thank you very much for coming around and watching us today, guys. We really do appreciate your viewership and your support. And I hope that this is educational, informative, and entertaining. And on that happy note, we'll wrap up.
Thank you for listening.
Bye-bye, guys.